Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone from your stations across the world. Thank you so much for taking your time to join today's webinar, which is organized by the Standing Panel on Impact Assessment, SPIA of the CGIAR. We have more than 100 people that expressed interest to join today. So we look forward to engage and we welcome you all very much. My name is Siboniso Moyo. I'm from the CGIAR based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with the International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI. I'm the Director-General's representative in Ethiopia. Thank you so much to SPIA for inviting me today to chair today's webinar. On 27 October, SPIA launched a report titled Evidence on Adoption and Diffusion of CGIAR-Related Innovations in Ethiopia. Today's webinar, colleagues, is organized to share and discuss this report. Before I introduce this esteemed team that we have today, I would like to express our appreciation on behalf of the CGIAR in Ethiopia to the SPIA team for undertaking this assessment. It was a pleasure working with the SPIA researchers, and I reflect a bit on hosting Frederick, who interacted with various scientists from across the CGIAR centers during this assessment. We learned a lot from your experiences, and partnerships were key in all this work. We work with the World Bank, with the Central Statistics Agency here in Ethiopia, with the CGIAR centers, with the Ethiopian Institute of Agriculture Research Centers, and other researchers across the country. Colleagues, the CGIAR has partnered with Ethiopia in its agricultural growth and transformation for over 40 years. During this journey, the CGIAR has contributed to Ethiopia's vision of agricultural transformation through knowledge, technological and policy interventions. The SPIA report illustrates several lessons from the CGIAR's collective work in Ethiopia. And this is a rare study. Why do I say so? It covers all core domains of CGIAR research. It spans animal agriculture, crop improvement, natural resource management, and policy areas. Today we have I'm privileged and honored to introduce to you a special panel, and I will also touch on the program briefly. I'll start by introducing Karen Macours, who is a professor at Paris School of Economics and INRAE, and is the current chair of SPIA in the CGIAR. Karen, able to wave as we welcome you to this session. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Karen will kickstart our program by giving a presentation on some of the key highlights of the report. This will be followed by remarks from 4 distinguished panelists drawn from CGIAR leadership, the Agricultural Research for Development community, and policymakers here in Ethiopia. This will also include funders of CGIAR and academics. I'll briefly introduce them one by one, and some will join us during the course of the session. I'll start with the Kundhavi. You are welcome. Kundhavi Kadiresan is the Managing Director, Global Engagement and Innovation in the CGIAR. You are welcome this afternoon to this session. I would also like to introduce Professor Douglas Gollin from the Oxford University. He was the chair of SPIA from 2012 to 2017. You are welcome this afternoon, Doug. We hope that Alan Tollervey will join us. I will introduce him when he's online, the same with Dr. Mandefro. So without taking much of your time, it's my pleasure therefore this time to introduce Karen and ask her to give her presentation. I would like to ask all participants during the course of this session to continue to write their questions, their comments, just their reflections and thoughts in the chat mode. Let us use the chat to engage. So please do post your thoughts on the chat. So thank you, Karen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. And thank you for many years of collaborations on this. So I will present in name of the team, most of whom are online, and we'll try to answer questions in the chat. So Frederick Kosmowski, who's been based was based in Ethiopia for the last 5 years, Solomon Nalemu, who was there, Paula Malia, James Stevenson, and myself. Okay, so as a way of introduction, what is this report? This report is the first of a kind of a new approach that SPIA has been taking in order to. Did the screen fall away?
Yes.
You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. In order to document the reach of the CGIAR at the country level across the different core research domains of the CG. Now, of course, reach is not sufficient for impact, but arguably in many cases it is necessary and so an important first step. We do this in Ethiopia. This first report motivated by the fact that many of the CG centers, but also the CRPs, have been active in Ethiopia. And so what we do is we do a stock take of the last 2 decades of research by the CG in collaboration, of course, with its national partners. We identify, so that the point of the stock take was to identify innovations that were disseminated at scale, or at least where there was good reasons to believe that there would have been that there was efforts to disseminate at scale through different mechanisms, the market, through partners, through the government, etc. Among other things, we did a stakeholder validation workshops with different with the different actors in February, just before we all had to stop traveling. And this is very appropriate that no see Mandefro online, since he was kind of a key actor in that exercise. Welcome, Mandefro. Now, one of the things we do here is after doing the stock take, and that's kind of part of the innovation, is we then worked with the Ethiopian Central Statistical Agency and the World Bank in order to build in novel kind of data protocols and methods to measure those different innovations expected to be at scale into the Ethiopian Socioeconomic Survey panel data. And prior to that, the kind of validation work in terms of making sure that the measures were accurate. This stock-taking exercise leads to kind of the following kind of big picture way. So starting from the universe of all CGIAR research in Ethiopia, kind of based on this extensive consultation and revisions of documents, we ended up identifying 52 innovations that were at least at pilot stage. So as the result of those kind of 20 years of the last 20 years of research. These innovations are about equally spread between crop germplasm improvement, animal agriculture, and natural resource management innovations. Of those 52, there was evidence, evidence, I'm saying there was kind of indications to believe based on the interviews and the literature that about 30 of them may have disseminated at scale. And in the Ethiopia context, these were also, those 30, we could also think about how to measure them. So we had the observable features that we can build into the household or the community surveys. Of the 30, we ended up being able to integrate into the ESS and the ESS4, building on the partnership. 18 of them, again, spread across the 3 different domains of the CG. There is a few, and I'll talk about that later, that we purposely omitted because there were other contemporaneous efforts ongoing to measure them, and specifically the central, with the involvement of the Statistical Central Agency, we didn't want to duplicate the measurements in different surveys. And then there is another 9 that were not included so far, but that are candidates for inclusions in certain waves. So the detailed stock taking exercise, don't worry, I'm not going to talk through the details here. I just put this up here because to indicate that this is online. So the details of the different innovations, what we document about them, etc. Apart from the 52 innovations, there is also 26 examples of policy influences that are documented and that I'll come back to. Now, this is one of the first finding was these numbers that I just showed you. The second finding is okay, what do we find once we collect this data about the actual reach of those innovations in the field among farmers? So this graph has the number of rural households that are adopting these CG-related innovations. And again, when I say CG-related, all of those are, of course, innovations where the CG has worked with its national partners throughout. So what this graph shows is a very skewed distribution. So many innovations that are adopted by not that many households, but a few that are adopted by quite a lot of households, in fact. Now, strikingly, the top 3 here represents the 3 different or 3 or 4 different core domains of the CG research. The first one, soil and water conservation practices, reflect NRM and policy research. The second is maize germplasm, and the third is poultry crossbreeds. I should note that what is not on this graph are those few innovations that we did not include in ESS4. In particular, notably absences are wheat and haricot beans, where the evidence from other surveys do suggest that those are they are possibly also at a large scale. So the takeaway here is some have scaled a lot, many of them not necessarily, but the ones that have kind of cover different things. If you look at the other takeaway is that when you look at all of these innovations together, you get a very different image than when you look at one of them at a time. And so when this then allows to kind of come up with a calculation of the total number of households reached, where we take kind of a lower and an upper bound approach. So between 4.1 and 11 million households reached by innovations, according to the survey data, where the lower bound represents those innovations where we have a very clear marker of a CG role and an observable kind of embodied innovation in the survey, and where the upper bound includes all the innovations that where we know that those are innovations where the CG and its partners have done research on, but where the attribution is weaker. And so that's why we do this upper lower bound approach. The second finding, or the third finding, in fact, is this looking at what types of households are being reached. So the big advantage of having incorporated these measures in one survey is not just that we then can compare and look at all the innovations together, but also that we can see what type of households are being reached with those innovations. So on the x-axis here, we have the different innovations, again, by the domains of CG research. On the y-axis, on the horizontal axis, we have variables that help to proxy for the type of households that are being reached and that are often targeted by CG research. So the farm size to get at smallholders and remoteness. There is kind of the gender dimension that, of course, is important. There is variables proxying for poverty and living standards, and variables for age. Now, the first takeaway of this graph is that the many NS that you see of this table is the many NS, and NS means that the correlation between those observable characteristics and the fact that the households adopt some of these innovations is in fact not significant. So what does that mean? It's not significant. It means that households with different characteristics are equally likely to adopt these different varieties. So which goes back to the saying that the innovations are reaching many different types of households. But then then the second thing we see here is that you do see a lot of red and green too, So the red indicates that certain types of households are less likely to adopt and certain innovations, and the green is that they're more likely to adopt. And here again, we see a lot of both colors, which indicates that some innovations are more likely to be adopted by certain households. So let me take an example as an illustration on the gender dimension. So we see, for instance, that poultry crossbreeds are in fact more likely to be adopted by households where the managers are female. And we find the opposite for large ruminant crossbreds, where households with lots of female labor are less likely to adopt them. And so again, kind of a picture of the CG as a system reaching many different types of households, individual innovations reaching different ones. And of course, one of the questions I think for lots of people in the audience will be, to what extent does this correspond to the households that were being targeted by those innovations, yes or no? Then the final empirical results I will show in detail is this issue of synergies, which is basically a correlate of what I just said before. So again, this is by type of innovation. And so if I look for the animal, crop, NRM, and policy, if I look, for instance, at the intersection between the NRM and the crop one, so this is now looking at the farm level. There's a particular household that adopts, for instance, CG maize varieties. Is that same household more or less likely to be also adopting some of the NRM practices? So what we see here, so the green means they're more likely, the red means they're less likely. And again, the message here is very mixed. So we see both negative and positive signs. So both evidence of synergies, but also of substitution between innovations. Now, of course, this is the fact. This is what we observe in the data. Whether that then, what's the reason for this lack of synergy or for the supplements is a different question. Now, the report has many other findings that I will not go into detail, but I'm just going to indicate that they exist as an appetizer to whet your appetite to actually look at the report. So there is the narrative overview of the different innovations and policy influences. There is much more detail on adoption rates, also comparing those with earlier evidence. There is, for a number of innovations, an interesting story on the dynamics of adoption, both by comparing across the waves of the survey, but also, for instance, by looking at the age of the varieties on farmers' fields. And then importantly, by working with the national representative survey, in fact, the survey is not just national representative, it's also regional representative. And so it allows to see where the different innovations are diffused at the regional level, how that relates to the location of research activities, but potentially also how that relates to the agroecological zones that were being targeted, the recommendation domains, etc. Finally, there is a discussion on misclassification if we use self-reported measures versus, for instance, for crops, DNA fingerprinting. I didn't mention this, but so this survey is also the first where there was DNA fingerprinting for crops included, for multiple crops included in a national representative survey. The main takeaways. So what do we take away from this? We find widespread adoption of CG-related innovations, but at the same time, few innovations that are reaching very large number of households. Now, arguably that's as expected, since there is inherent uncertainty in EIAR4D, and since the timelines of different innovations are also are also different. Because of this very skewed distribution that I showed, it also means that if we look at innovations one at a time, we get a very incomplete picture. At the same time, it also means that there's real questions about scaling for many of the innovations that need to be addressed. We don't find clear evidence of synergies at the farm level, which reflects that different innovations are reaching different types of farmers, but it may also point to constraints that potentially limit the gains from those synergies. We find that the innovations are not disproportionately more likely to be adopted by male, larger, richer, more educated and more connected farmers, which may have been the prior of some people. That's good news in terms of contributing to CGIAR's 5 impact areas. But at the same time, as you recall from seeing that graph with the many colors, many innovations are not necessarily reaching the target households or the target regions, and that then raises further questions. The most widely, I didn't yet say this, but the most widely adopted innovations, those three that were on the right side of the skewed graph, each of them, when we look in more detail, what we can show that these, or we can discuss that, and the reporters, that in all of those cases there was a combination of biophysical research and policy research that informed, or that arguably informed, government policies and programs, and so kind of a story of system level pathways to impact. Now, the final thing I'll say is kind of what we hope people will do with this next. And so the data and all the analysis, the replication files are online, are open access. And the report on purpose, in a way, establishes, aims to establish facts, but also aims to raise many questions that we don't necessarily answer, but that can be answered by others, including some of them with the existing data in the SS. And so this is ready for further analysis. Now, of course, an exercise like this comes with caveats and limitations, and I pointed out to one of them, which is that not all of the innovations were included because of capacity or because of data collected elsewhere, and that's important to keep in mind. This was the first case in Ethiopia. There will be others to come, and in particular, the most advanced is an exercise along these lines for Uganda. We kind of in terms of kind of the use of this in terms of kind of more decision makers, and of course that's what the panel will be talking about. So we're moving from a kind of an approach of focusing empirical data on a single innovation to the portfolio of innovations, and that arguably links with the intent of the one CGIAR reforms. But on a more kind of micro level, if you want to, kind of what this data can, and we hope will be used for, is to think about, now that we have those estimates, not just of how much, but who, where, and when diffusion has happened in a country like Ethiopia, this now arguably provides the stage to reevaluate some of the theories of change related to those innovations. So the where and for whom are scaling efforts working, and does that correspond to what was expected? And if not, what may that suggest in terms of approaches going forward? The why, is it the case that some of those are the kind of, I pointed to the synergies between biophysical and policy research. Clearly, more work is needed there too. And then the where and for whom are the bottlenecks proving to be too constraining, and what does that suggest on the way forward? And with that, let me end and turn it to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for introducing the report and scanning through some of the key findings, key takeaways, and also raising some questions on what next, what can be done with these results, where are some of the gaps. So this takes us to the next phase, where we open up to the panel to share their remarks, their thoughts and reflections also on what next, what's their observations, what are some of the insights. Earlier on, I introduced 2 members of the panel. So I would like to introduce the other 2 now, starting with Dr. Mandefro Nigussie. It's my pleasure to see you online and welcome you. He's he's the State Minister in the Ministry of Agriculture in Ethiopia, and he is the former Director-General of the Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research. I wish to extend special thanks, Dr. Mandefro, for your leadership. You worked very closely in this assessment, especially in the consultations with the various partnerships and other agencies. And we really appreciated your support and partnership through this phase. I also want to, through you, to extend appreciation to the government of Ethiopia for hosting the CGIAR and really working with us over these years. So thank you very much. You've created an environment for a strong partnership over the years. Thank you. The other panelist that has joined us is Alan Tollervey, who is the head of agricultural research in the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office of the Government of the United Kingdom. You're welcome, Alan. I hear your video will not be showing, but it's great to have you online. We also take the opportunity to thank the UK government support for part of this work and other CGR work in Ethiopia and globally. So it's good it's a pleasure to have you online. So I will start with you, Alan, if you could give us your thoughts, your reflections, your insights following Karen's introduction of this report. Thank you. Over. Each panelist has 7 to 8 minutes just to give us key thoughts and insights. Over. Alan.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me fine. Yeah, unfortunately I don't have a video. I'm happy to join this from my phone because I had trouble accessing the seminar through my FCDO laptop. So let me first of all start off by thanking the team Karen's team that did this study, and appreciate the work and effort and the commitment from everybody, including the Ethiopian government, in delivering this. And one of the things I've been doing just in the last half hour is watching the UK Finance Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, cutting the UK aid budget this year and next year significantly. So we're moving into a very tightly constrained environment for aid. There will still be a major aid donor agency, and but we're in an environment, and most governments are in an environment, where they're going to see the amount of money they have to borrow increase and the amount of money they have to spend be heavily restricted. So what does that mean for these studies? I think what that means is, in any environment where ministries of finance in our country, the Treasury, is looking at what it wants to spend money on, it wants to spend money on the things that have the greatest impact, the most important things, the most impactful work, the work with the greatest benefit cost ratio, greatest rates of return. It's a highly competitive environment we operate in, where there's always far more demands for funding than we can possibly meet. And we critically depend on evidence of impact of the work that we do in investing in the CGIAR and agriculture research, and in research generally. I work in the part of the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office that it was part of DFID. It was lifted and moved on as a sort of single unit into the FCDO as Research and Evidence Division. I work for the Chief Scientist in DFID, who's now the Chief Scientist in the FCDO. And we generate, among what we try to do is generate new technology evidence, innovation, through organizations like the CGIAR, and also we depend entirely on the evidence of the impact of that comes from our external partners. So, you know, the work that's been done here and the work that others do to demonstrate the value of that investment is critical at any time, but especially critical as we move into a very tightly constrained financial environment for the next few years. So if that's my first of all, this report is very welcome and it's timely, and it represents a really major step forward. The second thing I'd say is to cite this in the context of the work I do in the CGIAR as a member of the System Council, which is really supporting and developing the work on One CGIAR. I think that having worked with SPIA for several years, I think there are some really critical lessons coming out here about the way that One CG is constructed to support the efforts of the Ethiopian government and other actors and stakeholders inside Ethiopia to deliver, you know, economic benefits, deliver the SDGs, sustainable intensification agriculture, welfare benefits generally. And I think the critical part about that is that SPIA has credibility in this space. It's able to present an independent view of the impacts of CGIAR R&D and use novel approaches to generate that evidence. I was really struck in reading the report. I remember talking to Doug Gollin, when he was chair of SPIA a few years back, about the use of DNA fingerprinting, for example, to generate better evidence of the diffusion of crop varieties in Ethiopia, particularly wheat varieties, I know, which are not directly covered in this report. And some of the fantastic evidence that's been generated, for example, the diffusion of wheat varieties and other crops, and the benefits those have had on poor people. This sort of clear line of sight backed by credible evidence is really critical for us. And the independence of SPIA and the ability of SPIA to work independently and to link into national efforts in Ethiopia, CSA and the LSMS, has been really important in terms of us using this data and this evidence to present it inside DFID, FCDO, I should say, old habits. And so that connecting with national efforts, use of innovative approaches, and the independence of SPIA is a really critical part in our ability to use this. The third thing I'd say is the data itself is really useful because it provides real insights into who, where, it gives the disaggregated information on some of these really vexed questions around the synergies between different technologies that Karen mentioned at the end. And I thought actually Karen's list of questions on the last slide were really excellent in terms of highlighting, I think, what the report has generated in terms of new evidence, but also what the questions that still remain to be answered are. And some of those, as I said earlier, directly relate to one CGIAR. I mean, I think this idea of synergies and the way in which technology is acting in terms of bundling technologies, it really gives a real mixed picture on that. And I think that's really useful. I mean, we don't expect to be given a very clear black and white answer on that, but it does start to provide evidence and answer some of those key questions about what we know about synergies of technology. But it also gives a clear evidence for one CGIAR about the extent to which we need to bring innovation systems thinking into the way that the CG manages its work, because not everything goes to scale. A lot of things will not go to scale, but some things go to scale, as the report says very clearly. Some things go to scale really quickly, and some things will never go to scale. And one of the things that characterizes CGIAR&D is that they haven't been able to bring that innovation systems approach to managing research. So the report, I think, is really useful in terms of, we're busy doing a bit of work right now thinking about stage gating and end-to-end approaches to research management, linked partly to the CG and partly to the COP work that we're doing, ready for COP26 next year. And again, the report is really useful in us trying to think through what we mean about innovation systems, how you might apply it in an organization like the CG, and how you might scale work towards those things that are ready to move to many more farmers, and pull back funding to things that are not in that state. So again, very useful. And the lack of clear evidence on some of these questions around synergization and substitution in some places, reaching I think I characterized it when I was writing my notes, reaching many, rather than reaching lots of things to a few people, reaching lots of people with a few things. And I think that, again, I think is a really interesting insight for us to dwell on and think about it. So I'll bring this to a close now. I think for me, both in terms of the work I do in FCDO and the work we do in the one CG, the report is really useful in actually providing some evidence to help us do this work better, but also throws up some really interesting questions, I think, that we need to dig into a bit more. And I'd like to see this sort of work repeated elsewhere. We'd like to see this sort of study done in other countries. We think it's extremely valuable, provides a real focus of the CG's case for investment. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alan, for those insights and thoughts and observations. I wish we had time to react and reflect, but I'm sure we're noting, and there will be a time for further engagement on this. Karen, I saw Karen writing throughout. Thank you so much. Our next remarks and reflection will be from Kundhavi. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and thank you, Karen and Alan. I'm really pleased to join this panel today. I'm representing 1CG. I'm also representing the executive management team. This is quite an important study, and I want to underline the importance of such a report in understanding the effects of the various interventions and investments based on evidence. That's such an important one, coming at a time when 1CGIAR is looking at the overall way, not only putting our strategy, but how do we be more effective as 1CG in scaling up an impact. So it's very, very useful report. It also comes at a time where it's a good time. It confirms and adds to the findings of other recent publications on CGIAR's positive track record of working with partners to impacting the world's most vulnerable smallholder farmers. You must have heard about the report from the supporters of Agriculture Research Foundation, for instance, which concluded that the investment of CGIAR research has a 10:1 benefit cost ratio, and with the majority of benefits accruing to farmers. Again, another report by the CIRES 2030 article in Nature also found that CGIAR is unique in its focus on and commitment to working together with smallholders. It all points to the message that Alan was making. In a sense, unless we have a lot of evidence to show what the investment and the interventions are bringing, to get even funding from governments and funders is becoming increasingly difficult. Just as he was mentioning about his government where the funding is reducing, I am sure it resonates well with the Honorable State Minister who's here in this panel, who must have a hard time going and standing in front of his finance minister to make a case for agriculture and agriculture research, still further difficult. So we all understand, therefore, the importance of these studies. And as we speak now, we see more than half of the set of countries in Africa are actually, the investment in agriculture research is falling rather than increasing. So in a sense, this comes at a good time. And how do we really use this to go beyond ministers of agriculture to the larger stakeholders in countries to excite them to put more funding and effort. Now, some of the key messages, again, it builds on what Alan has already mentioned. So for me, it was just what stands out was the comprehensive and the scope of work that CGIAR has had over the last 20 years in Ethiopia. And the assessment itself, it's a very comprehensive. It provides a holistic and integrative CGIAR support to Ethiopia. And it also highlights the impact that it has had from 4 to 11 million rural Ethiopians, and highlighting that the breadth of CGIAR innovations ranging from crop germplasm improvement to animal agriculture, in natural resource management, in government policy. So a whole range of issues that the innovations and interventions have targeted to, and what it can actually do in terms of impact. The second for me was largely the methodological innovation, and especially the DNA fingerprinting of varieties across multiple crops. It really stands out. The visual aids, the novel data collection instruments. I remember a few years ago in the field, when you talk to these surveyors, just having tablets and putting the data instead of transformed for them, both in terms of the ease and accuracy in which data is collected. So the story that the report said how it went about, for me, it was really an exciting way to read those. It connected with me with the concerns that the data collectors talk about, the researchers talk about, and what does it mean in terms of the quality of findings being more robust. So those were actually pretty interesting and innovative, and I think it is just a huge lesson to be shared for other work that is being done in countries in very difficult environment. So it's a major part of our lessons, I would think. The third part was the innovative partnership, and the extent and the scale of partnership was just amazing. Starting with the government to the World Bank through its Living Standards Measurement Study, and SPIA and the Ethiopian Statistics Agency, along with the academicians and CSOs coming together, that indeed complemented the capacity, the tools, the resources among all partners, and that made a big difference in SPIA's work in terms of the quality of work. And again, all goes to say what partnership can also bring in terms of our work in these very difficult areas when it comes to agriculture research. And attribution, again, the fourth part where I want to sort of mention is it's often difficult one. But the DNA fingerprinting and low-cost visual aid prototypes that was mentioned for the sweet potato and the chickpea are a powerful one. But the report is also equally frank in its discussion on this and what you can and what you cannot. And I found that actually quite frank in the way that was addressed as well. I also wanted to emphasize the impressive positioning of government here. The priority they're given to agriculture growth programs and policies. You see that in the livestock master plan, the support system that they have in the extension agents to farmer ratio, the importance on agriculture productivity and market performance, the emphasis that Ethiopia had given to safety net programs all speak to government's ownership and commitment, which makes some of these programs more effective as well. So here is also a message we need to get out. What is the role of government when it comes to these policy dimension and also in capturing the evidence and impact? Now, what's the opportunity going forward? I hope we can replicate, not in the same way, every country is different, but an opportunity to learn from this going forward. Another consideration is how would we work along with World Bank and FAO? They have a whole lot of work through the Data Smart Agriculture project, and there is an opportunity to build on the agriculture census and agriculture survey work that is happening in a number of countries. So how do we build on some of the methodology and ideas coming out of this report? I also want to speak a little bit about what are the lessons for 1CG. One, we want, as we implement our research and innovation strategy, which is getting concluded, we will be learning a lot from the analysis of reports like this. We will also be giving a lot of emphasis with respect to coordination and collaboration to co-design and co-deliver. Again, with regional bodies, national governments, national agriculture research systems, regional banks, and other partners. So these are sort of the big takeaway. What does it mean for 1CG? For also, what does it mean with the countries like Ethiopia? I see this as a huge intensified collaboration at the country level with a number of ministries, along with UN agencies and other working groups that have been established to expand the scale of our program. Internally, there is also a lot that we could be doing, how reports like these are internalized. An important question, both from a development perspective and from our funders and key stakeholders. I see this in the following ways. First, awareness to such reports and to generate a discussion within, with our stakeholders. So these reports are not just sitting out there in a shelf for academic purposes only. So that's a huge starting point, giving emphasis. And the fact I am here is to give that message that we take these seriously and we want to do something about it. It is a problem in many organizations. Good report, very good, let's put it there, but how is it getting translated into action? So the second one is the institutional structures are being rewired now within 1CG. And it is to ensure that we have the right units that pay attention to it and also bring the processes into place that the learning happens. So aligning to our strategy and investment plans as part of the new institutional architecture. And that's something through the performance assessment, results, learning units that we are going to be looking at, we will pay a lot of attention to this. And the third is the investment plan templates that are now being developed now. We are making sure that the lessons learned dimension from assessments are also captured into it. So you are institutionalizing some of these things so that it gets built in, and this is not just another report sitting there. I just want to end with a few remarks on our support to Ethiopia And it is the emphasis 1CG is putting in terms of country engagement and regional engagement. That's the area where we want to really enhance. And Ethiopia is a shining example in that sense. When we really engage in and bring it to scale and work in partnership, it can make a difference. The COVID-19 hub is a very good example. The Ethiopia, along with Bangladesh, are countries where we have, it's a test bed for 1CG, working together, all 12 CGIAR entities in the program and on the COVID-19 hub Ethiopia country team. Now, we would like to see that how CGIAR is providing this broad-based, holistic, integrated support across the government's 5 top areas, and how that can also translate it into impactful action. Let me close there again by congratulating the teams that went behind to do all this work over the last few years, but the commitment that we would make as 1CG to take this very seriously, and working together with you all, that we can continue to use these reports in not only fine-tuning our work in the design and implementation, but enhancing the quality of partnership, so that the quality of such work also gets improved and what we learned in Ethiopia can be replicated several-fold in other countries. And thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Kundhavi, for those reflections. Without further delay, I will ask Doug to give us his comments, insights, and observations. And I will ask him to shorten a little bit. I'll gain 1 or 2 minutes from you with your agreement. Over.
Of course, I was keeping an eye on time, so I'll try to be brief. I think the first thing to say is just that this is an extraordinary effort, and I'm very excited to be part of this panel. In the interests of full disclosure, I'm probably not a completely objective commentator. I was involved in some of the very early conversations about these studies, but that was very much at the stage where this was all kind of a distant dream. And so I'm a little bit overwhelmed to see the study as it's actually come to fruition, which I think exceeds in every way those original dreams. And so I want to begin by congratulating, in particular, the Ethiopian Central Statistical Agency and the World Bank LSMS team, as well as the SPIA team, who I think need to be commended for producing what is really a path-breaking study. As far as I'm aware, this is the first study of its kind to be done anywhere in the world, offering a detailed, objectively measured, nationally representative stocktaking of technologies that are in use by farmers. I think it's also worth saying broader congratulations are due to the Ethiopian government and to the CGIAR for actually wanting to know the answers to questions about technology adoption. In some sense, it's a risky thing to go out and do a survey like this. You don't really know what you're going to find, and that can be a nerve-wracking thing for institutions that are dependent on political support or for external funding. And so I'd like to compliment these institutions for their courage. This isn't necessarily something that big institutions are often congratulated for, but I think it was quite courageous to proceed with a study of this kind. The study is important, I think, for Ethiopia. I think it's also important for the broader research community, and that's mostly what I want to speak to in my remarks. As we seek to understand the lives and livelihoods of smallholder farmers in a world where hundreds of millions of households earn their living from this kind of quasi-subsistence farming, and actually where hundreds of millions more depend on these smallholder farmers for food. So I think given that context, it's imperative to understand the technologies that farmers are actually working with. Understanding what they're actually doing gives us some insights that we can use to understand the challenges, the constraints to adoption of new technologies and new methods. And I think this study has 2 important uses in that respect. The first is as a detailed, high-resolution snapshot of technology that's in use today. And the second, what I want to come back to, a little bit optimistically, is I think a study like this serves as a fantastic potential baseline for monitoring change over time. And I think both of these are really important. From a research perspective, I think the kinds of data that are in this study will allow us to make enormous progress relative to the data previously available. We've had, over the past 30 years, and I'm clearly old enough to remember research in this field for that long, the biggest strides forward we've made in understanding agricultural development have come from the expansion of the data sources that we have available. The earliest studies that were available when I was a graduate student were rather small-scale studies of agricultural households. And since then, we've improved our understanding hugely with shifts both to nationally representative surveys and studies that go inside the household that add more detail on what's going on, and the improvement in our understanding of household dynamics, household farming, and the complexity, the deep complexity of agricultural households and smallholder systems is enormous. So the gains in our understanding have been closely linked to the data sources that we have available. I think it's easy for those who don't spend much time thinking about agricultural households in developing countries to imagine that these are simple, they're economically simple units. They're just engaged in some kind of subsistence activity. And what we've come to understand over the past several decades is the great complexity of decision-making of households that are almost mini conglomerates. They engage in multiple production activities, multiple home production activities, and the balancing acts that they're facing imply hugely complex decision-making processes. Having detailed data that lets us get at these questions is of great importance. Having clarity about the technologies that farmers are using is going to help us in all kinds of ways. We've been relying until now on farmer reports of the technologies that they're using. And farmers are, of course, very knowledgeable about what they're doing, but like any survey respondents, they're limited in their ability to provide us with a really fully accurate description of the technologies that they're using. Some things are just so obvious to them that they defy description, and other things aren't necessarily clearly defined, or they may not think about them in the ways that we do. So questions, for instance, about management practices. And then in other cases, and I think seeds and genetic resources are the best example here, they may simply be poorly informed about what technologies they're actually using. So gaining clarity on these matters in the way that this study has done is of great value. I think the other thing to say here, and I want to pick up briefly, I'm going to try to shorten what I'm saying, but to emphasize a couple of points that Karen made. One of the things that I think is really striking here is about the heterogeneity of the technology adoption that shows up in these data. There are lots of households adopting some technologies and not others. It's not just that there's a small set of households that are well integrated with the research system and are taking up the products. It's really suggestive to me of households that are critical consumers of technology, that are picking and choosing the things that work for them. And I think that, again, ties into this complexity of household decision-making, and a reminder that we shouldn't generalize too quickly about what an average household looks like in Ethiopia. Huge variation across space, across various other dimensions that we'll really need to dig into for a long time. And I think also really crucially, this leads to an important point about the need for research and extension systems not to push one-size-fits-all technology recommendations. And so I think that that's a key takeaway for the research system, for those of us who are involved in understanding research impacts, and I think for the broad community of academics far beyond Ethiopia, who will see this as an absolutely path-breaking study that will change the way we think about technology and technology adoption in agriculture. Let me stop there.
Thanks so much, Doug, for your observations and insights and bringing up the research perspectives in your comments. I'll now invite Dr. Mandefro to give us his reflections and insight. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boni. I think everything has been said. I just want to add a few things that are remaining from the perspective of Ethiopia. So I really appreciate the work done, the level of independence observed by SPIA, and the analytical capacity that SPIA team has, and the way they developed the tools, the level of analysis done. I think the level of engagement of these different actors, SPIA used CSA, the World Bank, and other sources of information. Sometimes we have the data, unless we process and make use of the data to make decision or to do something, it's just the same as not having the data. So synthesizing the data sets, the databases of different organizations, and coming up with this kind of article is not an easy task. It has taken quite some time, and they did a very good job in terms of having the report, not only for just informing us, but also to inform what we are doing. Again, in this exercise, the financiers were also engaged in here, not only the CG centers, but also the national programs, universities, and other actors, civil society organizations, banks, and the National Bank. I mean, so their engagement is really very important to have this kind of product. So as a result of the level of sophistication used in terms of technique and the analytical capacity who designed the study, we have these wonderful results of the study. And the study is not just, you know, the data gathered from a desk review or just by asking communities or development agents or subject matter specialists, researchers, and so on, but also this is well supported by advances in science in terms of DNA fingerprinting. And that's really, you know, a one step forward compared to other data gathered, analyzed, and the report written. In some cases, you know, I had the opportunity to engage in the preliminary data presented at Ildery at your campus, Dr. Boni. So what we have seen from the DNA fingerprinting is much more reliable and much more showing the level of adoption of these technologies or innovations in the farming areas. So what did we benefit from this finding, from the discussion that we had when this publication was produced? We produced a 10-year perspective plan as Ethiopia. So the findings in here helped us a lot in terms of fine-tuning how we can measure the impact of this 10-year exercise. So again, we would like to continue to collaborate with the CG Center and those who are engaged in evaluation on refining the tools that we are going to use in our 10-year perspective plan, how we can measure our success and how we can control our errors. So that helped a lot. And again, in addition to the 10-year plan, we're also working on 12 areas of policy revision. So just to cite a few examples of this policy revision, you know, you might ask, what is the importance of this study in terms of revising the policy? This study has a significant contribution to revise the way we do our business in agricultural education, in agricultural research, in agricultural extension, and in marketing. So just to name few of the area where policy changes are required in order for us to reach the targets we set are the land use, and the land administration. The technology in terms of agricultural research and the inputs in relation to seed, fertilizer, agrochemicals, and farm machineries, and our investment related to agriculture. So in the area of irrigation, in the area of market infrastructure. So we have 12 areas of policy revision, and we did that for the last 4 months, and we are at the final stage of being signed by the ministry management and accountable institutions on moving this policy revision to the cabinet of ministers and to the parliament for a final approval. So this kind of policy change cannot be achieved unless we produce this kind of studies. So the data generated, when it is analyzed and supporting our decision to move forward, then it makes sense. But the data generated, and we write a scientific article, and it remains with the scientific community. For the wider farming community, that may not help. I know we need to write papers, and advances in science has to be continue in order for us to work on the operation side of it. So the field level impact can be seen when the papers are influencing policies, and the papers are influencing the way we allocate budgets, and the papers are influencing how we finance the different units of the agricultural development. So again, you know, that level of adoption, which I really appreciate the way it is sequenced, is also showing us the priority that the government of Ethiopia is giving to the different commodities. So just a reflection of that. So maize, which is labeled as a second adopted, is really a huge investment area for Ethiopia, and the success story in terms of utilizing improved innovation or technology is like 54% of the farming community are using research results. So that shows, you know, so this data shows the level of emphasis that we give to specific commodities in terms of food security. One thing that I couldn't see in here, but the way we invested and the way we did our job, that wheat is an important crop in Ethiopia, and we invested a lot, and the technologies, the innovation that went to the farming communities, significant. But somehow it couldn't appear in here. That's fine. It could be, you know, the location where this study might have been done, or the people we contacted. So these are some of the kinds of things that we can refine as we move forward. So the partnership between CGIAR and the national program is also an example that I would like to label, where the CG centers are the sources of the technology or the innovation, and the national programs do the work of contextualizing the international products to their own environments. The two together can produce a very good technology or innovation that serve the community. So the context specificity or the context base is with a national program, and the source of technology is with CGIAR Center. And the two together can really bring it a better result or a better impact. The other thing is, in terms of partnering, we have foundations, bilaterals and multilaterals supporting our research system, and the government is also investing a significant portion of the budget to agriculture in both research and extension. So that really magnifies the level of adoption. If it had been only the investment of CGIAR, so when CGIAR terminates the project or finish the project, the adoption rate might not continue the way it's going like now. So the investment that we are getting from the government, the support we are getting from donors, and the technical and the source of technology and innovation we are getting from CGIAR centers. So these are, the different elements that comes together for this better impact that you see the level of adoption. Unlike many other countries, you see an impact on the farming community. One other thing is that the model we are using in terms of promoting technologies or innovations, we take model farmers, usually men farmers. So the poor farmers, and in some cases, women farmers might not have equal opportunity to access the technology, the innovation, and the knowledge and the skill. So in that part, maybe looking forward, if Karen can help us, design something related to that, how can we really make the technology that we are promoting is fair and equal for all, for youth, for old, for women, for men. That part, we're not as strong as maybe a CG center. The other thing is the trade-offs, because we are using land as a common denominator or as a common factor. So when we promote wheat, what will happen to maize? When maize, is going very well, what will happen to sorghum? This kind of options, if they can be based on evidences that shows economic benefit, is something that I would like to put on the table. So the one CGIAR that Kundhavi highlighted, Ethiopia is a good place to begin that kind of programmatic integration and building the existing relationship to a higher level. So I would think, and Dr. Boni do agree with that, so Ethiopia can be a good pilot for one CGIAR. I'm not saying dismantle the 12 CG centers at Iliri and come up with one, but under one administration, they can have a better impact when they are really linked, they are integrated, and their efforts are brought together. That's what I would like to say. And thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Karen, for the wonderful job done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mandefro. It gives me great pleasure to thank all the panelists at this time. Very interesting insights, observations, and reflections. And my sincere apologies that we are 10 minutes over what we were allocated. I think the organizers are pushing, but Karen, I will allow you just to use 2 minutes and also close our webinar. So thank you so much. A lot to think through on next steps. We will continue to engage and work together in seeing how we move forward. So I'm handing over to Karen. Thank you to all the participants. So Karen will close on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. And thank you to all of you for your comments. We heard I won't come back to them. I'm just going to say we heard the call for kind of pushing the lessons learned further. We are very, the team is ready to work, Mandefro and Kundhavi, with your teams to try to do that. with Bonnie at the Ethiopia level. Let me just kind of finalize with thanking all of you for your engagement, not just today, but for some of you, your long-term support. For some of you also, the way you've informed, I think, the thinking on this. For Bonnie to host the SPIA team in Ethiopia. And I guess the last thing I want to say is to recognize that, we realize this is a difficult time in Ethiopia. We appreciate even more your availability to be part of this. Despite that, we also, this work was also based on, ultimately on surveys with many farmers all over the country, and so it's particularly in this time, clearly also thinking of them. So thanks for participating and looking very much forward to the next steps on this.
Thank you so much, and goodbye everyone. And thank you, SPIA, for organizing today's webinar. And thank you, bye.